So let's just go right to your just initial thoughts on the movie.
Yeah. Well, you know, okay. To start sort of at the beginning, I feel like I have to say, in order to say what I really appreciated about this film, I kind of have to back up a second and say what I like so much about the original Star Wars films, because it's that relationship which to me was so exciting about seeing this film. I feel one of the things that really makes the Star Wars films so powerful is the way in which it is. Star Wars is like unashamedly mythic storytelling. And that, you know, and I guess I'd have to back up one step further to kind of qualify what I mean by mythic, because of course I'm using the word myth in the sense in which Tolkien would have used the word myth. But the word myth has really fallen out of favor in a lot of ways, because in the modern world, most of the time that people use the word myth, they mean something people believe that isn't really true. And at most, if they're trying to be sort of generous or culturally sensitive, they mean something that another culture believes, even though I don't believe it, right? But usually it's used in a much more dismissive way than that, in the Mythbusters sense, right? But of course, when Tolkien used the word myth, what he was talking about was myths are a subset of stories. Okay, it's a particular kind of story, a particular kind of storytelling. And what a myth, and one of the points that he would make, and C.S. Lewis talked about this a lot too, it was Tolkien that kind of talked C.S. Lewis around to this, was that basically there are some things that you can do in a myth, in mythic storytelling, that you just can't do in other kinds of storytelling or in other kinds of media. There are ways that basically myth is a story that really sort of touches on truth directly, really sort of big things. Star Wars does, The Lord of the Rings does a wonderful job of, when you get Gandalf and the Balrog on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, that is a powerfully mythic moment. When Gandalf, who seen from a distance, right, you've got Gandalf as this small figure towered over by the Balrog, who's, the shadow and smoke, seems to envelop Gandalf, but you can still see Gandalf standing on the bridge, shining with white light, saying, though he looks completely almost overwhelmed by the opponent who is facing him, he's standing there saying, "You shall not pass." That's a powerful mythic moment. It conveys something. It's not even about. It's really hard to talk about, but that's actually one of the things that kind of defines myth. That there are things that are very difficult to put into expository prose, things that are really difficult to explain, but you can touch them. Your imagination can approach them through myth in ways that you just can't if you're trying to explain it in like philosophical prose. That's one of the powerful things about myth. And there are a lot of things which, so like Tolkien, for instance, Tolkien was not really at all very good about talking. There are very few times he even tried to talk about things like what he believed, spiritually or religiously, even though he was a deeply religious man, he almost never talked about it. Because he couldn't really do that. He didn't really do it well. The few times he did try to do it, he didn't do it very well. But what he could do is he could use myth to sort of approach a lot of these ideas, which were really deep felt ideas for him, deeply believed ideas for him. And they enable people to approach them in this really sort of remarkably direct way. So anyway, that's kind of general context of what I mean by myth. Star Wars, as I said, the original Star Wars, I think is as powerful and as influential as it is because it does a marvelous job of mythic storytelling. And you think of the ideas that it captures, the ideas that it approaches. When you try to talk about it, it's hard to talk about it without it sounding trite. You talk about the light side and the dark side, and that Luke's temptation to go over to the dark side, and his love for his father, and the way that his relationship with his father could lead him to the dark side, and his anger about his father and at his father. Or, of course, we end up seeing in the Return of the Jedi how his love for his father helps lead his own father to redemption. You start talking about these things, and it sounds incredibly cheesy. But in the mythic storytelling, it's really powerful. It conveys these things in a really, really powerful way. Now, Force Awakens. the thing that I was so fascinated by, and it's one thing it's really the one comment I'd already heard about the film before I saw it, was the shall we say intimacy of the relationship between The Force Awakens and A New Hope, right? Between episode 7 and episode 4, the very close parallels between them. So I was kind of prepared to be thinking about the two of them together even the first time that I saw it. I loved the relationship between A New Hope and The Force Awakens. Again, the criticism that I've heard, and I've heard it, a bunch of times, is that essentially, Force Awakens ends up being like it gives so many sort of does so much homage to the original film that it ends up being unoriginal. It ends up being just a repeat, of the first film. And it's not that I can't see what people mean when they say that. I get where they're coming from. You can make that argument, and it would be kind of hard to disagree that the parallels are that close. But I feel that people are very seriously missing the point when they're getting that, or rather they're really just kind of missing out on the beauty of what's going on there. Because the fact is, it is the same story. It's supposed to be the same story. That seems to me like the entire point. The big ideas, the light side and the dark side, and the temptations to go over to the dark, and how that's tied up with your own emotional background. We got Luke and his father in the first films, and we get Kylo Ren and his father in this film. And but of course it is. Of course it is. You've got a new generation. Guess what? Like, light and dark haven't changed. It is the same. There's always a way in which in a new generation, it's always the same story, and yet it's not ever exactly the same, as no two people are alike and no two stories are exactly alike. One of the things which I have always felt, and again here I'm hardly alone in this, and I know that both Tolkien and Lewis talked this way, the idea of the sort of, well, I would even go so far as to say obsession that the modern world has with novelty. Right, to be original, to do something different, merely to separate yourself from what came before and not to be derivative. In the end, I find that a little bit sort of cheap, I guess I would say, and that desire to be a little bit sad. The real stories are the big stories, right? Yes, good and ill have not changed since yesteryear, as Tom Hillman, one of my listeners, is quoting on the side. Right. This of course is what Aragorn says to Éomer in the Two Towers when they encounter each other, and Éomer is trying to figure out how are we supposed to be. Exactly. Good and ill have not changed since yesteryear. So if we come in, the thing that I dreaded most about the sequel, the thing I dreaded most about that I was hoping Force Awakens would not do, is simply trying to kind of distance itself, right? Like, okay, we're going to do a sort of parallel thing, but we're going to make a departure, right? Instead, we're just going to kind of turn things on their heads in order to be different, right? In order to sort of distinguish themselves and kind of break the mold. In some ways, again, that's like in my mind, one of the great modern obsessions is to just break the mold and do something different. They didn't do that. And I was so delighted by how they didn't do that, by the extent to which they didn't do that. I found it so refreshing and so wonderful that they really embraced the idea that that this is, good and ill have not changed since yesteryear. The light side and the dark side are fundamentally the same. They even, in fact, the way that they play on the fact that the earlier story has already become a mythic story, not just for the viewers of this film, right? Because, of course, we all grew up with Star Wars as this mythic force in our own lives and in our own experience. And yet, within the film, we see Rey especially growing up with that as a mythic force in her own life, right? And I loved that moment when, Rey's reaction when people talk, Luke Skywalker, really? Are you Han Solo? And you can see the way in which that sort of the power of that story to her. And I loved the way, and this, the clear, I think, turning point for this in the film was, of course, the moment when Rey first herself begins to use the Force consciously, when the Force really begins to awaken in her actively, that is during the interrogation sequence with Kylo Ren and her attempt, at first unsuccessful, then successful, to use the Jedi mind trick right afterwards, right? But that is when we can see her recognition that she really is taking part in the same story. It reminds me, again, to indulge myself in a Tolkien parallel. It's like that. It reminded me of that moment on the stairs of Cirith Ungol with Sam and Frodo, when Sam realizes, when they're looking up at the star, right, and they're thinking about Beren and Luthien, the ancient stories that they've heard, and Sam realizes, wait, you've got some of that same light, in the lady's glass that she gave you, and Sam says, "Bless me, we're in the same tale still." Right, and I feel like Rey had that moment. Rey has that moment where she's like, "Wait a second, I'm in the same tale still." Right, this is me sitting around listening to stories about Luke Skywalker. I'm in a Luke Skywalker story. This is something that's for me too. And I guess I thought the way that was handled was beautiful. That whole sequence, that interrogation sequence, is my favorite part of the whole film. The way that it turns. The way, even down to the execution of it was so good. The lighting, like, you notice how, because of the lights on the walls behind them, when the two of them when Kylo Ren and Rey are facing each other, when the camera's on Kylo Ren, he's got the blue light from behind Rey on his face, and she's got the red light from behind him on her face when it's facing her. Just beautiful. Just to see the sort of the lighting motifs playing on the whole light side and dark side and their interaction and the way that it kind of comes together. They're just, all that stuff was so well done. It was, in this way, not only really effective mythic storytelling on its own in this new story, but the way that it was consciously related back to the old mythic story and kind of integrated and it acknowledged, very openly acknowledged, yes, this is the same story, even down to, Han Solo's crack about, like, there's always a way to blow these things up, right? Like, I know this story. I've been in this story before, right? There must be, and that's, again, I really liked that. To me that really appealed. It didn't feel at all like something which was just kind of trying to, sort of cheaply recapture an old thing. Like, we're just going to kind of cut corners by repackaging the old thing in a slightly new wrapper and try to pass off the thing you liked before in sort of a slightly new flavor and with new, sort of packaging. That's, sort of the most scathing kind of version of the criticism that I've heard of the film. But again, I feel like that
it works.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely works. I feel like that criticism really misses the point.
I feel that's always tricky, though, and I feel like it's always hard to know. Like, it could become cheesy, it could become trite, or they could become off like they're just packaging something in plastic to sell it again. But it worked, and credit goes to the director and that team, which I think goes for those original films too, because I almost think that it's a happy accident with folks that were involved with Jim Henson and those creative people, and a limited budget back then, where they, especially the first one, where they were coming together and they had this great score and just a perfect storm of creativity where they were, again, giving themselves to the material. And so it doesn't come off as cheesy. You made me think of something I watched today, an interview with Luke from way back, where he said, I'm told that maybe in the year 2004 I'll be back for the final trilogy. I didn't realize that the seeds for this film have been around for a long time. And in that interview, he says, it's the film almost gets a little cheesy, and it helps when Han kind of rolls his eyes and it's like, oh, we're going on the ship with that thing, and he makes these cracks. And you just mentioned a crack, and there's a great ensemble of characters there that almost acknowledge and wink that, this is a cheesy space opera, soap opera, but we're at the service of a soap opera between family drama, and that has a weight to it. I enjoyed that moment about Han rolling his eyes, kind of helping us as the audience not be embarrassed to enter in. So let's look at this question here from Nick.
Do
you feel that the attempts by Luke and Han to bring back their family members are mythically related to the mercy of Frodo for Smeagol? And hopefully we get to talk about what's that word that was invented by Tolkien?
Eucatastrophe.
Eucatastrophe. I don't know.
Yeah. Nick, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I certainly do. I mean, to me, Nick, the most powerful, I mean, I said that interrogation scene was my favorite scene in the film. Um, what I think was the greatest, it's my favorite in the sense that I enjoyed that most. That's the scene when I was watching the film for the second time. It's the one I found myself looking forward to most. But the scene that I think is the greatest scene in the film, which is not quite the same, is the one that I liked best. Is the scene where Han goes out on the walk to appeal to Kylo Ren, and yet, Nick, the way that is, the way that they handle that, the way that Harrison Ford handles that, the way that we see him make that decision in a very conscious way, right? That this is not, he knows that this is probably not going to work, right? I mean, it seems pretty clear that it's not an impulsive thing that he does. He makes the decision to go out and call his son back. And it is an act of mercy. I mean, in a simple way, I mean, they're there to destroy the place, right? It would only take it would only take a slightly Machiavellian consideration to say, hey, look at the exposed place that the great enemy captain has placed himself here in the middle of this, right? If you just get Chewbacca's crossbow and aim at his head, you can probably take him out right now, right? But of course, Han is not thinking about that. Han is primarily thinking about recalling his son. That's why, it's the other reason why he came. That's clearly why he wanted himself to come. It's why he volunteered for this particular mission. As you can see Leia sort of recognizing, right, when she tells him to bring their son back. Just the gorgeous way in which that moment brings together. Well, you think about like moments from all of the first three films, not just the parallel to A New Hope now, not just the original Star Wars parallel, but think of all three of the scenes. Right? You get in particular, like sort of the combination, the scenery obviously, right, looks just like the scenery where Darth Vader confronted Luke and told him that he was his father for the first time, right, in The Empire Strikes Back. But of course, it looks just like that scene, except of course what's actually happening is just like in The Return of the Jedi when Luke was going and handing himself over to Darth Vader because he was trying to appeal to Darth Vader and bring out the good that was still in him, right? So you can see both of the way that confrontation between Han and Kylo Ren really brought together, visually brought them together, sort of thematically brought them together. It was just it was just gorgeous. I was absolutely I was just kind of ravished by that particular moment. And can I just say on a sort of a simpler level, what a relief just to see those kind of mechanics being done so much by storytelling mechanics. The storytelling mechanics of the prequel films are so bad. I mean, so incredibly bad on almost every level. Writing, scene arrangement, acting, every element of it was so dreadful. And just to see these concepts, which I really loved and I thought were such powerful concepts, actually being done so successfully was lovely. It was really a relief.
Yes, let's stay with that spoiler alert death scene for a moment. Yeah. I would think that in answer to Nick's question, it would be a eucatastrophe if what happened, it does that action of mercy bear fruit in the future episodes. Yes. I hope it does, and I think it will. And that will be a very redeeming, beautiful moment. Leia gave him a mission, bring back our son.
Yes.
He does something out of character, or his whole life of being a scoundrel and a villain, a criminal, and he shot first at Guido.
Right. He's looking out for
so his arc, he finally at the end goes out there and he touches his son's face in an act of love and mercy. And if that does, I think it still can bring him back. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean,
we're feeling cheesy because we're talking about something that's kind of embarrassing but beautiful.
Oh no, absolutely. I am unashamedly hoping for that.
Yeah.
I I I I have to admit I doubt it's going to happen. I wouldn't bet that it's going to occur, but that's certainly what I'm hoping for. What I am hoping for is that it will work. That basically we will see, although he seems, of course, to have failed in the sense that he didn't bring his son back, right? That in this bigger sense, that is going to be a moment which is going to, going to be pivotal.
Haunt him. Yeah,
back.
he will be haunted by that forever. Just a little bit. What would you say? There's one criticism is that this villain is just lame. Kylo Ren, he's just pathetic. What would you say to those people? Or is he?
Oh, I don't think so at all. I loved Kylo Ren as a villain. He's not as scary as Darth Vader, no question. He's not as scary as Darth Vader. But again, I like that he's a different. Well, no, I was going to say he's a different kind of villain. He's not, but he's a villain at a different stage, right? The question, Darth Vader was already I'm forgetting who delivers the line. He's already more, Obi-Wan says that he's more machine than man now.
Yeah.
You can see all the robot parts that he has, and he can't survive without his mask and all that, and he lives inside that egg, right? And everything. And, he does look like he's scarcely even human anymore. And that, of course, is sort of the central dramatization of the confrontation between them, right? They with Luke coming in wanting to see, Luke saying there's still some good in you. We get that kind of outward parallel, right, about how he's almost completely a machine, and yet there still is some human within him, even if in the end the only human thing he can actually do ultimately is die, is sacrifice himself. But anyway, okay, so that's Darth Vader, and yeah, Darth Vader is completely terrifying from the beginning, and he's much more successfully totally terrifying than Kylo Ren.
Intimidating.
But that's not what Kylo Ren is supposed to be, right? Kylo Ren is somebody who is in a different stage, right? He literally wants to be Darth Vader, but he's not yet, right? And that's and again, I love that in my favorite scene, that the turning point in Rey's entire life is the moment when she has the insight that you're afraid you're never going to be as powerful as Darth Vader, right? When she sees to the heart of him and what drives him. I was shocked. The first time I saw the film, I was shocked when he took his mask off. Couldn't believe it, right? Because he was doing the Darth Vader thing all the way up until then. And I even liked that. I really loved Kylo Ren's voice, right? It was, the sort of the distortion of his voice when he was wearing the helmet. It sounded kind of like Darth Vader, but it wasn't exactly the same, right? It wasn't just trying to kind of recap it. It has much more expression. It sounds more human than Darth Vader's voice sounded, like in the first two films. So like it has more personality than the voice that James Earl Jones did in the original trilogy. So okay, it already had that. Then he takes off the mask, and I gasped when he took off the mask. And of course, there's this remarkable contrast. You expect, certainly, the Return of the Jedi has expected us to see, when you take off the mask, you're going to see something tragic and horrified and twisted, right? And instead, you see this quite attractive guy, right, with swooshy hair and sensuous lips.
A little bit of a loser, though, too. A troubled teenager.
Exactly.
Yeah. What I say when people do but he's pathetic, I go, he's pathetic. He's a great character. That is his character.
That lead you to that sense of his own inadequacy. Obvious is what connects him to the dark side. I kind of see one other thing that I thought, and this is a kind of a shocking thing to suggest. One thing that I actually thought The Force Awakens did better than the original trilogy was Kylo Ren's temper tantrums. Right, when he like takes out his lightsaber and just freaks out and destroys the whole bank of computers and stuff in front of him. You think that the dark side is supposed to be all about releasing your anger, right? And this is sort of uninhibited emotion. That's how the Emperor talks about it. And yet, in the original trilogy, Darth Vader and the Emperor are both always totally calm and collected, right? You'd sort of think, hey, if you're all Mr. Darkseid, like, aren't you in touch with your anger and your rage and your hate? I don't see you releasing your anger at any, you can say, of course, that doesn't mean that you're totally out of control all the time. But still, that's what I really liked about that, because you can see, like, okay, yeah, this is sort of the dark side coming out. If you're giving yourself to the dark side, it means you're not going to be habitually. You're going to be at least at risk of kind of losing it like that at various points. And even the way, that sort of comical moment when the two stormtroopers are coming around the corner and he's destroying the chair that Rey has escaped from, right? And they sort of pause and turn around and go back around the corner because they don't want to go anywhere near him when he's in that mood. And again, you can see this is, when you've got a Dark Lord who's continually, releasing his anger like this, then this kind of thing's going to happen. So anyway, I did really like that. So no, I mean, Kylo Ren, the way that they make him dynamic in the sense of he's in motion. He is somebody who is a bad guy, but he's poised, right? I mean, he could. You can see that he could come back. Luke has a kind of blind faith almost in the. I mean, he says, "There is good in you, Father. I can feel it." Right? I'm sitting there watching the Return of the Jedi, saying, "Okay, look, I'm gonna go with you on this, but I don't feel it." Right? I mean, I've no idea. He doesn't look like there's much good in him to me. Right? And of course, it makes it really beautiful when of course he's justified and it actually comes out. With Kylo Ren, you can see, yeah, it's not just that there is good in him. It's that he is still he's not somebody who's actually jumped. It seems like he's not somebody who's actually jumped off the cliff yet. He's really kind of still sort of poised on the brink. And that's where we see him when Han Solo confronts him, right? And that moment, one thing that you've seen the film more than I have, so maybe you can do one thing I'm going to be paying attention to again tomorrow, is their hands, right? So Kylo Ren takes off his helmet, right? And he's standing right there, just face to face with Han, and he draws his lightsaber, but he's not turned it on yet, right? And he's holding it parallel to them, right? It's between their two bodies, right? And he says, Father, I need your help, right? I need you to help me. And of course, it seems clearly designed to be, sort of suspense. Like, is he going to hand over his lightsaber and yield to his father? But you never see the turn of the lightsaber. And thinking back to the point that you were making about Han Solo and what may be revealed down the road and what kind of long-term impact this scene may yet have on Kylo Ren. What happened? I'm not 100% convinced that what happened there was simply a betrayal, right? It kind of looks like a betrayal. That is, like, Kylo Ren is kind of drawing him in, and then, at the last second down below, he sort of turns the lightsaber around and turns it on and stabs him. I'm not 100% sure that that's necessarily what happened. Did Han Solo know? To what extent did Han Solo know or suspect what was about to happen? I'm not sure. I mean, it seems to me, and especially, Aaron, coming back to what you were saying about Han Solo's overall character arc, which I too love. I mean, it made it to me just 10 times more powerful that the person we see in that position of self-sacrifice. It's hard for me not to see that as an act of self-sacrifice. He's obviously at the least willing to sacrifice himself. He comes out unarmed onto the bridge. He knows his son is armed. He knows that his son with his lightsaber could kill him at any minute. He's at least willing to sacrifice his life. I'm wondering even if he's actually actively sacrificing his life. So like I said, I will be interested to see if we ever sort of learn any more about that, because it didn't. I mean, obviously Rey and Finn and Chewbacca all react as if they're very surprised, and it looks to them like a betrayal. But I wonder. I mean, Han, the facial expression he makes, it's one of pain, but I don't really see how could you possibly, especially as you say, the way he reaches out and touches his face afterwards.
Yeah.
It seems I don't know. There seems to be almost an element of consensuality in it, which to me just makes it so beautiful as an act of self-sacrifice. And I'm really curious to see where they are going to go with it.
Let's ask a real just broad as a film question here. How would you rate the film on a scale of 1 to 10? You could tell us a little bit about your mechanism for that. How would you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10 stars?
I would rate it pretty high. I have to say, I don't. Well, first of all, as a lot of my listeners know, I don't really like criticizing things in the sense of picking apart the bad things about it. And doubtless there are lots of flaws that it has that many people would point to. Nor do I feel very well qualified in comparing it with other films and the technical elements of film craft and everything are things I'm no expert on. Mm-hmm. But personally, for me, as far as my own reaction to it, and also I would say now that I've seen it twice, the way that it stood up to second viewing as well, I would give it, I would say, a 9. I hate to give it a 10 because there's, it could have been great. I only cried 2 or 3 times. I could have cried. Maybe.
That was my next question. How many tears? So more than one.
Oh yeah, more than one.
I had 2.
Like I said, I'm a sucker. I cry at the drop of a hat. And what's more, I cry at. I am way more likely to cry at a happy moment, especially a eucatastrophic happy moment, than at a moment of tragedy. So, like the death of Han Solo, I didn't cry at the death of Han Solo. The 2 moments when I actually did shed tears were the interrogation scene and the moment when Rey calls the lightsaber, when the lightsaber whips past Kylo Ren's head and goes to Rey. That was the other moment that I was also. My biggest weakness. You want to guarantee to get me to cry in almost any film. It's a reunion. Like, oh man.
I mean, that's what
they're like. The music swells and they run forward and embrace each other. I'll cry every time. It doesn't even matter. I'm a complete sucker for that in a film. Anyway, so I actually came close with the when Rey returns and embraces Leia at the end. That was I kind of missed it up there. However, that especially with the combination of the sort of the reunion between them, and of course nothing's really been revealed yet, but even without thinking about it, I wasn't sitting there speculating. So wait a second, it wasn't even really until afterwards that I was really consciously thinking about so who exactly are Rey's parents? I was just kind of but it didn't matter. At the moment that the I guess I can't really call it necessarily a reunion between Leia and Rey. It felt very emotionally powerful in that way. And then the fact that it's combined with, that it's also a moment of mourning for Han Solo. That was the moment at which I was more moved by grief for Han Solo's passing, even than watching it happen. But but I found those very. I find I am affected by scenes of beauty, like when the things I was trying to explain about the interrogation scene and about the cow confrontation. Those kinds of elements are the things that really get to me, and I will often.
How about the Millennium Falcon? I didn't get choked up, but I imagine some people did when the garbage will do, and we turned to that.
I found that delightful.
Yeah.
I was I laughed and there were several times in this film again when I was laughing with not in amusement but in delight. That was definitely a moment of that I found. Delight is a word that is so often cheapened, I think, in casual conversation these days.
Mm-hmm.
People tend to say, that was delightful, when of course they don't mean they didn't like it much at all. But I find delight to be a really an important word, an important concept. And that, her discovering the Millennium Falcon was definitely delightful in that way.
By the way, let me just interject right now. Thank you all for joining, and we may go on for a few more minutes, so please do let your followers on Twitter and Facebook and wherever else know that we're having the most important discussion of all time here tonight with Professor Corey Olsen. He's a professor of medieval literature, specialist in fairy tales. I hope you can scroll through the messages over there to your right. You can see his websites. The TolkienProfessor.com is a great place to start, I think. And on that note of delight, it made me think of the word whimsy, which I really love. The audio may not be the greatest, but your first lecture on The Hobbit, I think for those of you out there who want to get to know Dr. Corey Olsen's lectures, I really recommend his first lecture on The Hobbit. It introduces you to some concepts that I think of delight and whimsy in The Hobbit that are totally absurd. I love the way you talked about this chamber ensemble and the fact that they have viola da gambas or something that are as big as their own bodies, and here they are, refugees in a war. Do you really think that Bombur carried a giant cello all the way from the Iron Mountains or wherever they are, and they have an ensemble and they go out to get their clarinets among the walking sticks? It's totally absurd. It makes no sense. But it does make sense because this is a beautiful story for children. Starting at, I don't know if you can, we won't have to go into that, but I love that. Is that kind of what you're talking about with delight and whimsy? But it's different here.
It is. But I mean, there's little in the Star Wars story that is quite as whimsical as that. The droids, maybe. Yeah, the droids to some extent. But yeah, there's something.
Is it your lecture, The Ridiculous and Sublime? Is that the one?
Yeah, that's it's actually the title of the second of the Hobbit lecture series, where we talk about the trolls and the elves, the Rivendell elves, the Trollo.
Okay, so it really is the first one. I wanted to share that link. Took and Baggins, would it be that one?
First one, yes.
Okay, I'm going to share that link with everybody. I would advise you guys to just bookmark it. I think it's a great intro into your work.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And boy, a long time ago. I recorded that in 2007, I think. It was a long time ago. But yeah, that was fun. So, no, I mean, I do find, and again, as you were suggesting before, the way that the comedy works, I found that it doesn't break the frame. As you pointed out before, Han Solo was always in the original series. He was... I mean, I don't know. Talking about it this way, I always start sounding like an English professor talking this way. But basically, Han Solo serves as a kind of stand-in for the reader, right? We're not part of this world, as you said. It's very easy for this kind of story to sound, sounding sort of cheesy and over romantic. Han Solo interjects this sort of skeptical point of view. Really, the parallel that I would make there is between Han Solo and Bilbo. Actually, Bilbo is in that role in The Hobbit, where he's the one who's sort of resistant to what's going on, this world of magic and adventure, and he doesn't really know about this. So if you're coming to this book and you're not necessarily 100% sold on the fantasy thing, and you're not necessarily into that, well, it's okay. Bilbo's not into it either. And he doesn't really get it. He's very resistant to it, at least at first, and only slowly gets drawn in. And we can see even in film one, by which I mean, of course, A New Hope, we see Han Solo getting drawn in, right? That's one of the whole plot threads of the film, is that Han Solo, he's just a mercenary, right? He's not part of the cause. And yet, we see, of course, the choice that he makes at the end. We see Luke's disappointment before the battle because he believed that Han had been drawn in, right? And Han is disappointing him because Han is showing that he really is only a mercenary after all, and he really meant it. But then, of course, we see he does in fact come in, and the way in which the first film ends with that medal ceremony, and Han still looking kind of self-conscious and a little bit like, I'm not wholeheartedly a part of this, right? And yet here I am dressed up and receiving the medal and everything, and still kind of looking somewhat flirtatiously at Leia, right? Not, he's still not quite part of the, like, I am part of this solemn ceremony and I am now a member of this cause. It's so well done in that film, the way that Han was always the sort of the focal point for that kind of resistance, and it made it so much easier for us as viewers to connect to that. Star Wars, like The Lord of the Rings, was, you can tell a really powerful and a powerfully effective mythic story by the way that it's able to break into the lives of people who are not into that kind of thing, right? The way in which The Lord of the Rings and Star Wars have sort of opened this whole world of sort of this sort of, the fantasy mythic story to people who would never have had any time for it at all otherwise. And both of them do that really effectively. And so, yeah, Han was always, for me, really at the center of that. And so, yeah, to see him both continue in that role and also even to, but again, the way that he ends up and the way that works. Oh, and I meant to say earlier, that catwalk scene, I said it recalls all three films, but I only talked about the two. The I am your father scene in The Empire Strikes Back, and the I feel that there is still good in you, Father sequences in The Return of the Jedi. Of course, it also recalls the strike me down and I shall become more powerful than you could possibly imagine scene with Obi-Wan and Darth Vader in the first film, right? So the way that it brings together all three of those things into this one moment, which is yet uniquely its own, with the emotional charge between the two of them, how father and son are reversed, and the way that shifts the dynamics, right? The difference between Luke the son trying to appeal to the Dark Lord father, saying, "I know there is still good in you." The way, the way in which it makes it the same and yet still very refreshingly new to have that switched. To have the father saying to the son, "I know that there is good. Come home." So beautiful, so well done.
You want to take a look at that question up there, Corey? And maybe, I think you've kind of answered some things tangential to it. Perhaps you could look at that question and also think about, perhaps we have some people in the audience who do think Story Wars, Fairy Wars are irrelevant. I can't think right now. I need some coffee. That fairy tales, they're fairy tales. They're for children. They're not for me. They're not relevant. You might dovetail into that of why would anyone ever be interested in a fairy tale? But let's look at that question first.
I think it's a great question. Yeah. So Kelly asks, would I say that Star Wars or elements of Star Wars qualify as fairy stories? Yeah, I was actually, Kelly, just rereading on fairy stories today, and as it happens, and yeah, definitely, absolutely. It's one of the. I really would have loved to see what Tolkien thought about Star Wars. He didn't live long enough, of course. He died in 1973, so he never got the chance to see Star Wars. I would have been really interested to see what Tolkien had to say about Star Wars. I suspect that he would have liked it. But does it qualify as fairy story? Absolutely, it qualifies as fairy story. You don't. I mean, on the one hand, you could say in some sort of simple or even simplistic ways, well, it's clearly not fairy story because it's supposed to take place within our universe, So it's not like it's humans coming into contact with fairy, capital F, the land of fairy. It's not. It doesn't deal with magic exactly, except it really kind of does. Once we get back, and boy, I can't tell you how relieved I was not to hear the word midichlorians even once during The Force Awakens. Delightful. But I'm so glad they learned that lesson. But anyway, I would say that it I yes. I mean, I certainly would think that it qualifies in all the ways that Tolkien talks about. I think of, for instance, when in On Fairy Stories, Tolkien, one of the examples that he gives is that even though the people involved in the stories are almost entirely humans, there are very few actual fairies involved in the story. Yet he says that the story of King Arthur is very much there's much more of fairy about them than some of the the fairy stories, stories like Midsummer Night's Dream, which he didn't think much of at all. Certainly in comparison, I would say a very similar thing. That I think that there is much of fairy, and again, I think that what he would have been very sensitive to is the mythic elements of that story, of the Star Wars story, and I think that he would have recognized it as myth from the beginning. So yeah, I think there's no question that it would qualify. It certainly is not disqualified in any of the ways that he describes, for disqualification from fairy stories. You could say, wasn't it a traveler's tale? No, the whole beginning in a galaxy, long ago in a galaxy far, far away, actually separates it from us. Like in theory, you could get there, but it's removed, both from us in space and time. It's not just a place that you might be able to travel to somewhere in our world, or even in our galaxy.
Let's talk a little bit about fairy. Fairy. Do you like to spell it F-A-E-R-Y? How do you spell fairy?
Well,
it's kind of fun to be a snob, right?
Yeah, well, it's kind of hard to exist because there are lots of alternate ways and lots of different. The way, especially in his later career, that Tolkien spelled the word when he meant the land of fairy, the realm that fairies are from. He tended to spell it capital F-A-E-R-I-E, though he spelled it with a Y earlier in his career, so it doesn't make all that much difference. But the distinction, the F-A-E thing, is really just kind of an indicator that we're talking about the realm of fairy, the perilous realm, not an individual fairy.
And related to that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the lightsaber battles. This is what I thought of you when I saw Star Wars, is that we are suddenly in the wild of the forest, and we are confronting our deepest fears, and we're in Fairyland, we're having a sword fight. And by the way, though, I believe those sword fights are awesome, unlike the prequels, which there's a guy, by the way, it's very vulgar, but Red Letter Media is a brilliant guy on YouTube that rips apart movies. And I don't know how many times I've watched his reviews of the prequels. They're so funny. They're almost as long as the movie, and he's just ripping it apart. And he's having fun. But he points out, literally that there's a training school for Jedi, and it's absurd in that all the children are standing next to each other training to be a Jedi, when really now we're back to when you become a Jedi, this is an inner thing. It's not literally training with a robot, which is you're going to strike the child next to you. I guess they limit it down to the ones that survive that training.
Clearly.
But anyway, so we're in a wild forest. Did you recognize that when you watched it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was, in fact, one of the things I will say that I didn't notice the first time I watched it, and one of my students and colleagues at Signum pointed out to me, and then she and I and a couple others saw it together the second time, and I loved the parallel when I saw it, but I totally didn't catch it. The first time that Rey confronts Kylo Ren, so they're on I forget the name of the planet, wherever they go with the planet with the woman who runs the bar, the woman with the glasses. When they're there, and she's running off into the woods, right? And Kylo Ren is chasing her. She's down. Remember those scenes when she's in that gully, right, with the rocks on either side and the moss and the trees and the mist, right? And she's running and comes face to face with Kylo Ren. It looks almost exactly the same as Luke on Dagobah when he goes into that place where he confronts Darth Vader, right, and sees his own face within Darth Vader's helm, right? The visual echo of that scene from The Empire Strikes Back was very, very close. I totally missed that the first time I saw it. I loved that echo when it was pointed out to me, and I noticed it the second time. But yes, I thought both of those moments. You're thinking about, especially the way, the thing that I was especially interested in with the forest in particular. Do you remember that Rey draws attention to that, right? When they first come to the planet, she's, grown up on Jakku in the desert. And remember, she says, I didn't think there was so much green in all of the galaxy, right? So we see how this is to her clearly another world. I mean, it's literally the first other world that she's been to. But it's more than just a different world, right? It is to her an other world in an almost fairy kind of sense. And so, yeah, the fact that she's off wandering, she goes off into the forest by herself, and that's where she meets Kylo Ren in that moment, which is like that moment when Luke is off by himself in Dagobah. And anyway, I thought that was really fascinating. And then of course you got the parallel to the forest fight then at the end, except now we have the green of the forest overlaid with the snow, and yet with the fire coming up from underneath. I loved that kind of contrast, how you had this warring extremity of the elements. It was freezing cold, and yet the whole planet's about to explode into flames. And yet we're still in the forest there in the parallel to that first moment. It's so well done, so interesting. I mean, every so good.
Think about that moment when there was a rift between them and they're separated out and they can't continue the battle. Either right there, that's going to divide you into rolling your eyes and like, I am out of the story, or it has you.
Yes.
It's totally absurd, right? I mean, literally, you really think that the land separated out. But to me, that was a great mythic moment where because the film was working so well, it worked.
Yeah, I was, the thing that crossed my mind when I saw that moment for the first time was, I love that. I bet a lot of people are going to hate that, but I love that. Yeah. Like, is it contrived? Yeah, it's contrived, but it's one. I mean, again, it's like the whole light side, dark side mythic thing, right? I mean, it's a mythic moment where this gulf opens up between them. It's not merely a kind of like, Deus ex machina. We need to contrive a way to stop them fighting and killing each other here because we need to preserve them for the next couple films. It did not seem like that at all, because of the way in which there was this sort of obvious resonance between what was physically happening at that moment and what was, sort of emotionally and spiritually happening at that moment. The fitness of that was so good that I was, it was in that way to me the obvious, or the opposite of merely a contrived sort of twist in that way.
We had a contributor there, alas not me, said something about she was almost going to give into or I don't want to put words in your mouth, but something about she was giving into the dark side. Maybe I saw her; she was very angry, and it's almost like there was an intercession, perhaps from someone on an island on an Irish island interceding on her behalf. Maybe, I don't know.
Yes. Well, and that sense too was another thing that I really was interested in the film, and this was something that I was particularly interested in watching time, is that I felt, and I'll be interested to see how much the next films really continue to bear this out. But I had the sense of there was a sense of destiny to this film, of sort of destiny playing an active role. So that kind of that moment when the gulf opens up, it didn't seem, not only did it not seem to me contrived, it seemed like that's exactly the thing that sort of should happen, or that you should expect to happen. This was a story that was being unfolded in these particular ways. If the prequels with the whole midichlorian nonsense sort of took the Force into, a more kind of analytical, they were trying to go a little bit more scientific and science fiction with it, at least to some extent there in the prequels. In the, in this film, they seem to go almost the other direction. They made it even, it seemed to me, they made it even one step more mystical, and that the Force itself was like the title, right? The Force Awakens. The Force itself, this is not, it's not merely a metaphor, right? That's not, it's, to say The Force Awakens is not merely a metaphor for Rey begins to discover her powers. Like a new generation, a new Jedi figures out that she has, that she is strong in the Force. It's not just that, right? It's much more than that. It's like the Force itself is in some way conscious, and it is itself stirring to wakefulness and beginning to organize this story. And guess what? The story that it organizes is very much like the story that it organized before. Anyway, I think. I think that it was that struck me as very interesting.
Yeah, and let's let someone join us. We'll hope they won't do something. Well, you're welcome to dance on screen, but please do keep it clean. And dance moves are encouraged. Oh, Leanne.
I'm not going to dance. I was just wanting to say for all of the people that are new, if you click on the call-in button, you can come on screen and ask a question. So I just thought I would so that's what you do. You just click on the. So there's actually be 2 open seats. So I will jump out again. So if you just click on the call-in button, you can come on screen and ask Professor a question.
And thank you so much, Leanne. Leanne has done a tremendous job helping me. I'm a newbie myself to this format, and it's been really fun. I hope we can do this again. This was a lot of fun. Let's keep going until Professor Olson's family attacks him.
Absolutely. I know. Can I just make a quick comment for all of the people that are watching on the web? We've got 21 people watching on the web, which is amazing. So please just log into Blab, use your Twitter account, create a Blab account. They're free, so you'll be able to actually come in and make comments and jump on screen as well. So I just wanted to I've been typing in the comments, but just for anyone that's watching on the web. Bye.
So we'll have someone join us here shortly. Do you need to get a drink of water or anything? Are you doing okay?
I'm good, yeah.
Okay. I have a lot of, I wish you could see all the little Post-it notes. Thankfully, you have fulfilled what I expected in that I don't have to say very much. I should keep my mouth shut. But Chewbacca, didn't he rock? Michael Foster, I don't know if he's still, hey, say hi, Michael Foster, if you're here. I don't know if you're still here nerding out with us, but he pointed out that Chewbacca had a lot to do, and I didn't notice the first time, but he did. He wasn't just a guy in a furry suit. He had a lot to do. I thought that was cool.
That was really neat. I thought that the kind of deepening, I don't know, it seems almost like perhaps too much to say, but I did think that the deepening of Chewbacca's character was really interesting. I mean, I love even the fact that being constantly reminded of Chewbacca's presence, the fact that Kylo Ren was bleeding from the wound that we knew Chewbacca gave him, in Chewbacca's own grief and anger at Han Solo's death, was just really cool. The way that we see, did we ever see Chewbacca actually taking the only independent action I can remember Chewbacca taking in the first films was when he found and repaired C-3PO in The Empire Strikes Back. Other than that, we see, he's supporting, of course, but we never. So the moment when he goes back and takes the Falcon, brings it and collects Rey, and Finn at the end, seeing him act on his own, it was just I did find that interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm here. I'm interested to answer. I know Dave Kale missed. Dave Kale is one of my co-hosts in one of my podcast series, and I knew that Dave. I already addressed most of your concerns earlier on. You missed it. I know you came late, so you already missed.
And he's just a curmudgeon anyway, right? No.
Totally. I already refuted everything you were about to say. But actually, that point that you were just making there, Dave was saying that he thought that it was a jarring and ultimately unnecessary shift in the middle. From the race to find Luke to the race to destroy Death Star 3.0. Well, I mean, again, I felt that it was. I certainly disagree, Dave, that it was unnecessary. As to whether or not it was jarring, I don't know. I mean, I didn't find it jarring because it seemed to me part of the natural progression. The progression from the beginning of the film where we know that a bigger thing is going on, right? With the whole parallel to, help us, Obi-Wan, you're our only hope, right? The fact that we have what's going on between the Resistance and whoever, not the Empire, but I'm blanking on what their name is now, the First Order, right? Anyway, but most of it is personal, right? Most of the story follows Rey and Finn. But we're kind of reminded in that moment, and it's in that moment of transition, right? On that island by that pub, all of whose names I wish I could remember. When Rey confronts Kylo Ren for the first time, and when she's captured, that's the site of transition. That's also the moment where they are when the weapon is first deployed. And we're sort of reminded it's not just all about them, right? They too sort of see at that moment, it's not just about them and what they decide. That's, of course, central to Finn's arc, as of course, it's not just about him and his own escape. And he puts his desire for his own escape past him. And it's not just a cheesy romantic thing with Rey, but of him sort of recognizing I'm part of a bigger story. And this is about more than me. So to me, that's what that shift really signaled. So that's why I didn't find it jarring, because it seemed quite natural that the next step that the first step that they take is successfully saving their own lives. And even though they have certainly Rey has sort of ideas of like, we have to get the droid to the Resistance because some kind of end will be achieved if we do this, right? But she doesn't really know, other than the fact that she's conscious of the fact that this is following these old mythic stories that she knows. But that's the moment where we really begin to see, okay, no, it is kind of a big deal. They just kind of blew up the Senate, right? So we can see the bigger story, and we are brought into contact with the bigger story at that moment. So anyway, so that's why I didn't find it jarring. If you find it jarring, that's kind of up to you. But unnecessary, it's obviously not unnecessary. Clearly not unnecessary, because if the whole focus of the film were merely the rediscovery of Luke Skywalker, if that's all that ever happened, then first of all, we wouldn't get the parallels, which of course I've been defending. And so it seems to me entirely right that, blowing up, Death Star 3.0, as you say, Dave, seems to me, the most fitting end to the film and to the arc of this film in that way. But again, there would be, if all they were doing were seeking Luke, it would be almost as if they were, that would be kind of a turning inward rather than sort of an actually reaching out to accomplish something, which seems to me really necessary for the trajectory of that story. But hey, Michael, welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
Michael, are you getting a little bit late on this? We can just shift to some other random topic. Like, how about just in general, Tolkien, fantasy, free for all? This is Professor Olson. Meet Pastor Michael Foster.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Aaron's a good friend of mine. He told me about some of your ideas. I'm glad that I was able to make some of it. I guess maybe I'll just hop back. I'll start with Star Wars because you're talking about got me riled up a little bit. So who do you think is the most probably the weakest character in the new movie? I mean, besides Maz Kanata, who would be the weakest?
Question.
Weakest character is the overly obviously Nazi guy who is Kylo Ren's counterpart on the
General Hux.
Was that his name? And the general dude. Yeah, the excessively Aryan general dude. He was my least favorite character, I think, in the film. Not only because he's sort of obviously not appealing, but he wasn't supposed to be. But I mean, it was a little bit interesting. But I think what I liked about him least was the fact that that was one place, and it's only a kind of a small place, but it was one place where they seem to be deviating from the original formula for the sake of deviating from it, if you see what I mean. That is, of course, famously, and this is something that's especially noticeable.
But wasn't there some sort of tension between like Peter Cushing's character and Darth Vader, right?
Oh.
That's almost, this is like a younger version almost, right?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I was thinking, of course, of The Empire Strikes Back, where Darth Vader goes through like 4 different commanders over the course of the whole film. Apology accepted, right?
Yeah.
So the way that they're sort of taking that, and so yeah, you're right. There was that more open conflict in episode 4. We did get the sort of the 2 different poles, the sort of military commander and the evil Jedi,
guerrilla warfare commander, almost, right?
Yeah, I found his character least interesting. But it didn't seem to me, thinking about, earlier I was talking a little bit about sort of comparing and contrasting Darth Vader and Kylo Ren, and what I liked about Kylo Ren and what I thought was so interesting about both the parallels and the sort of the anti-parallels between them. And I think it's because of that. The way in which there was this element of what seemed to me almost juvenile kind of teenage boy rivalry between the 2 of them, trying to impress the supreme leader, right? The kind of looks that they're always giving each other out of the corners of their eyes when they're standing there both facing Andy Serkis, was that element. I don't know. I mean, it was okay, but it kind of it was my least favorite part. So
yeah, I like The Force Awakens. I don't think it's if it was the first time we were introduced to Star Wars, it wouldn't be a good movie. Obviously, it's not. But for what they're trying to accomplish, it was pretty impressive, right? Like, get distance from the prequels, bring up nostalgia, set a new storyline. But what's so funny is that a lot of the complaints about it is either it's too much, like the original, 4, 5, and 6, or it's not enough like them. It's what I've been hearing people complain about them.
Well, it's hard to imagine maintaining the argument that it isn't enough like them. I mean, I think it's. I don't know if this one wasn't enough like the first trilogy. I don't know what people are hoping for.
For real, yeah. It's someone told me not to give any spoilers for the new movie. I said, "Well, don't see New Hope because that's one big spoiler." But what I like about it is that you're gonna, instead of getting a fully conceived villain, you're going to get to see him develop into who he is, which was the idea in the original prequels that just really fell flat, right? Not the original, excuse me, the second trilogy fell flat because you didn't get the prequels. You didn't get a chance to really see the weakest part of that movie is when he turns evil, when Anakin turns to the dark side. It doesn't quite make sense.
Talk about your hard sentences to finish. The weakest part of the prequels was you can pick up. But
I think Kylo Ren is everything Anakin should have been. I thought he was perfect.
Oh yeah, no, I thought that was great. I mean, the thing, I recently rewatched all 3 of the prequels, which I hadn't done since I saw them and was appalled by them in the theaters. But I saw them because my sons, who are both of them wild about Star Wars now, insisted on seeing all of the films before we went to see The Force Awakens. So I did see them, and one of the things that really struck me was if you turn the prequels into a prose abstract and you just sort of put on paper what the core of the story was, it's a pretty good abstract. Like, in that form, it might be effective, but it was so poorly executed in every possible way. And as you say, Anakin turning to evil was incredibly clumsily done.
And apparently it was worse because my understanding is that Spielberg told Lucas that scene wasn't convincing, so Lucas actually went back and had them make it more convincing. So I don't know how it could have been less convincing.
No, me neither. I wonder if it might have been even better the first time because.
So let me ask you a more layered question. So obviously,
we'll get to Nick in a second.
The original 3 movies was really inspired by Joseph Campbell, right? How do you see the new trilogy relating? Is it moving away from like some of Joseph Campbell's ideas on myth and the hero towards more of a postmodern or more current idea on what it means to be a hero versus anti-hero, or how do you see the relationships in terms of the canon that not the canon of Star Wars, but just the thinking on mythology and heroes? How do you think it connects?
I think it might be the thing that I was most relieved by was to find that the new film wasn't just trying to be different in that way. Like, to give an illustration, one of the things that many people say they really like, people who really like George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones, either the TV series or the books, one of the things that many people will say that they like about it is that they like how dark and edgy it is compared to Tolkien, right? It takes this fresh new look at things. I don't consider that a fresh new look at all. It's just an attempt to kind of invert some things, and it's not. To me, I don't get freshness from that at all. I was afraid that they might try to go in that direction. That is, to try to be like, let's make like the dark side more sympathetic. And I was, and they didn't do that. And I was really pleased that they didn't do that. And as you say, in that way, the subtlety of Kylo Ren's character and the complexity of his dark and light desires, and the mixture between those desires and the way that was conveyed, I thought was really great. And the way that they made him, he was a very, there was much that was new and fresh and interesting about him compared to Darth Vader. And yet they did that without totally breaking the mold, without simply kind of throwing out the entire moral framework of the original trilogy and saying, let's just call that into question, because wouldn't that be edgy and interesting? I was horrified that they might do that, and they didn't. And I was really, really glad that they didn't do that. So, I mean, as far as things like the, heroic formulae and things like that, I don't know. I mean, in some ways, I find my own relationship to Joseph Campbell is a little bit, is a little bit complicated in some ways. That is to say, this is going to sound really disrespectful, and I don't mean it disrespectful. In the most respectful way possible, my primary reaction to Joseph Campbell is, well, duh. I mean, that is to say, like, he points out these trends, and it's like, yes, this is how stories work. These, you can see all of these things. I get frustrated sometimes with like people who read Campbell and feel like this is like a prescription, like in order to write an effective story, do all of these things. It's not what he did. It reminds me of, okay, well, this is not going to be a helpful illustration necessarily, but it's like people who, think about reactions to Shakespeare in the 18th century, where there was this world of, these groups of literary critics who built up these rules, right? They're like, if you look at the patterns of ancient drama, this is how tragedies should go, right? All tragedies have these elements. And then they made a big deal about the fact that Shakespeare broke all of those rules. Except they weren't rules. They were like, it was only the critics themselves who called them rules and made them into rules. They were just making observations about how these tragedies tended to be told, right? Joseph Campbell doesn't lay down like rules for heroic stories. He's just sort of pointing at this is how heroic stories tend to work. So I get sort of frustrated sometimes when people treat Joseph Campbell like these are the rules, right? And like the story obeying the rules. To some extent, things are going to follow Joseph Campbell's patterns if they're a good story, and they don't have to know anything it's just what he is.
It's not because Campbell came up with the patterns, but because the patterns exist in all good stories, and he identified them.
Yeah, and he identified them and drew attention to them, which is cool. But again, to me, the more important thing was they did not seem to be consciously trying to change the mythic paradigm in this film, and that's what I found such a relief. And to me, that was the cornerstone of what I really loved about this film.
Mike, feel free to stay with us. Let's get to Nick's question.
Well, am I audible? Just making sure.
Yes.
Okay.
I think so.
Cool. Well, Professor Olson, it's good to actually speak to you. You've probably
Yes,
seen
likewise.
my comments. Yep, it's from the Silmarillion film project thing. Anyway,
Yeah.
rather than going back to stuff that we were talking about, like probably about 20 minutes ago, I wanted to talk about what we've been talking about for the past 5 minutes and how so many people endeavor to complicate what's our heroes and our villains, and to mix them up, and neither Tolkien obviously doesn't do that, and Star Wars doesn't do that either. It gives us a clear representation of these people are the bad guys, and they're not being evil just for the sake of being evil. They're being evil because it propagates their ends, and people for some reason think that that's simplistic, and they want to add deeper levels to that. And very rarely do evil acts go any further beyond simple self-absorption. We see it every day.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I find so odd, because, like, for instance, to go back to Tolkien for a minute, from the very beginning, I mean, you can read it in some of the original reviews of The Lord of the Rings when it was first published in the 50s. One of the biggest criticisms that has always been made about The Lord of the Rings is it's so morally simplistic. It's so black and white. The good guys are completely good and the evil guys are completely evil. And my reaction to that is always, my first reaction is always to say, are you dumb? I mean, did you even read it? It's so demonstrably untrue. It's like, did you notice Boromir's character? Did you meet Gollum at all? I mean, did you pay any attention to any? Because in fact, I would say that one of the things that Tolkien accomplishes, as well as any other author of the 20th century, is showing like that the path between good and evil, and how you can end up being a villain without having evil intentions at any point along the way. Boromir almost gets there, right? Anyways, it's like the opposite. Their critique is, in that sense, I think, almost literally the opposite of what we see going on there. And yet, it's not. And I don't think it's simply the matter that now some of those people, like some of the reviewers from the 1950s, I think really didn't, in fact, read the whole book, and so perhaps they can be forgiven for such a crude generalization. But I've heard lots of people say that kind of thing who have, in fact, clearly read the whole book. And I think people say the same thing about people. Star Wars opens itself to the same kind of criticism. We've got light and dark, and it's all very, very polarized in that way, and all very simplified. But Nicholas, I agree that we can see in the Star, and especially in the new Star Wars film, we can see sort of subtleties to that. And yet you're right that they don't sort of, well, I was about to say needlessly complicate it, but again, it's not about complication. It's about, I feel like the main thing that people are kind of complaining about when they make that complaint, they say the characters are all either black or white. And I think that that's simplistic and silly. It's not true that the characters are all either black or white. I've come to think that the thing that people are objecting to, the thing that people are perceiving, is not that the characters are all either black or white. What they actually mean, or what they're perceiving, is that black is black and white is white. There are absolutes, unashamedly absolutes. In Tolkien's world, there are unashamedly moral absolutes. And we can see people, we can see people repenting and turning back to good from the path of evil. We can see people falling away from good into evil. In Star Wars, we get the same thing. We get those same there's a dark side and there's a light side, and dark is dark and light is light. And it's not apologetic about that. Even though, again, we do get very much moral complexity with the way that people navigate between the two of them and how they relate themselves to those two things and where they locate themselves between the light side and the dark side. That's where all the richness is. You don't have to say like, oh, there's no real light and there's no real dark. It's all just kind of grays. You can say that, but that's actually a far less interesting and a far less morally complex story than one in which you have the blacks and whites and have the characters find their way among those things.
Professor Olson, do you feel like you have 4 to 5 more minutes, or how are you doing on time?
Sure.
We want to respect your family.
Yes. Yeah, I shouldn't stay too long, but I could stay just a few more minutes.
And do you deal in absolutes like a Sith, as Michael Faulkner?
Yeah.
No.
No, exactly. Well, the question is whether my wife does, but I think she's willing to be gracious. I give her a few more minutes.
Nick, do you have a quick question? I have something I want to ask in case we're going to end, but Nick, do you have another quick question? Okay. Professor Olson, I'm going to bait you into this question. What I find most concerning about literature today is that it just doesn't relate to my life. Like, I really struggled with Moby Dick because there was a while I wanted to go on a ship and work on a ship for a while, but I really don't believe in whaling, and I'm planning to become a professional LinkedIn life coach, and so I just can't relate to Moby Dick.
Right.
Can you help me out here, because I really need things to relate to me. This is one of my favorite. And now I hope that you explode like I hear you explode sometimes.
Yes.
So tell us about your joy of hearing that our audience just can't relate to being a Sith Lord or Rey or Poe Dameron, so they can't enjoy Star Wars.
Yes. You're trying to egg me into one of my favorite rants. Of course, there are ways in which we are supposed to sort of find ourselves that we do, we should be applying the art that we experience and the stories that we get to ourselves and to our own experience. We don't really learn if we don't do that. People who can just kind of keep the story on this sort of abstract plane and never really engage with it and never really see how it applies at all are ultimately, I mean, that's kind of my definition of a shallow experience of this kind of a story. But yes, people who simply look for something that looks exactly like them, I honestly feel just a kind of pity for people who are reading a story which is just different from them, characters which are not like them, from a time which is unlike theirs, in a world which doesn't operate under the same rules that theirs does, in some kind of a fantasy world. And to say like, well, that's not my world, and it's not the world I live in, and so I can't relate to that. People who will only read, books about our contemporary society featuring protagonists who are in their own demographic and everything. Like the whole idea that in order to write a book for adolescents, you have to write a book with an adolescent protagonist, right? Like that's like an absolute rule. It's a ridiculous rule, right? I mean, part of having that experience, like, yes, that second step of experiencing a story is to apply it to your own life and to think about, how you can connect with this and how it's relevant to you. But the first step is to encounter something that isn't you. It's how you learn something and how you get something to apply to your own life. So yeah, the people who in books and movies seek only somebody who's essentially just a mirror, they're just kind of hoping to see their own face in the mirror. It's just really sad. So yeah, I certainly hope that that kind of shallow reading, where we sort of demand that kind of similarity and consonance with your world and your life. It's not just that books like Moby Dick or like The Lord of the Rings or movies like Star Wars, it's not just that they can have relevance to your life. They actually can have much more relevance to your life. I mean, this is going back to Tolkien's essay on fairy stories that Kelly was referring to before in the comments. The argument that he makes is that these kinds of stories are much more powerfully effective in arousing this kind of response and getting us to think in these kinds of ways than if we're constantly just reading stories about people just like us doing things just like we do every day.
Mm.
Yeah, fascinating. I wish I remembered. There's one of your lectures where a young lady says, "What do I do? The training material for teaching literature is telling me to talk about gender dynamics or this or that. And it was just so funny to hear. This is probably how people are being trained to teach. Like, you only teach it because it's relevant. What's the theme, and where's the redeeming moment or whatever, and where's the Christ figure? Or I don't remember the silly things they taught us. But But
no, yeah.
You know what? I rather than go for 3 hours on that topic, which I bet you could, maybe down the road we can do another one on expanded on how do we teach? I don't have kids, but for the parents out there, how do you teach your children literature? How do teachers teach? What is the best way to equip someone to be a reader so that they can grow in character? Which I assume you believe they can, and I think so too.
Yeah, I certainly do think that they can. Absolutely. No, so that'd be great. That'd be fun. Hey, let me answer Karita's question really quickly. She asks, what do I hope to see as the story unfolds? I am hoping to see, so my hope for what I saw set up in this film, I am hoping the second film is going to show us that I loved the way that we have the parallel at the end, right? We have Kylo Ren and, the Supreme Leader saying, it is time to bring him in to complete his training. And then you have Rey showing up with Luke at the end. So I am really hoping that the sort of parallel stories of Rey's training and development and Kylo Ren's training and development are going to play off each other really interesting. Again, thinking back to that interrogation scene with the red light shining on his face and the blue light on his face and the red light on her face. I'm really hoping to see that concept and that parallel really sort of expanded over the film, and to see how those two things, how those two plot lines and characters play off each other. That's the main thing I'm excited about and hoping to see in the second film. I would expect, actually, that the closeness of the parallels, the direct plot parallels between Force Awakens and A New Hope, I would expect that to decrease as we move forward. I doubt that that's. I loved it as the cornerstone of this new trilogy. I thought that was just a brilliant and a really almost startlingly surprising way for them to go, that they would go as far as that in establishing that. I loved it. I wouldn't expect that to continue. If we get the same parallels with The Empire Strikes Back in the second film as intense as we got in the first film, I'll be surprised and I think a little bit disappointed, but we'll see how it goes. But I think I would not expect to see that continue in that way.
They have a good director too. Yeah, they've got a good director for the next one. Rian Johnson is much more of a darker sort of layered sort of guy than J.J. Abrams. So it'll be fascinating to see where he takes it.
Any other quick questions? I want to let Professor Olson get back to his family.
Yeah, I should do that.
Yeah. I think we should wind down here. Thank you all so much for joining. Professor Olson, I want you to have the last word. Tell us a little bit, just real quickly, recapping how people can follow what you're up to.
The best place to go, I think, is go to mythgard.org, mythgard.org. You get links there to my podcasts and the podcast episodes that are doing. We're doing a bunch of things through the Tolkien Professor stuff. Of course, we have a bunch of open programs through mythgard.org. And of course, it's also a gateway to our academic program, our master's degree program at Signum University, where if giving people the opportunity to realize their dreams of actually pursuing formal studies and getting a master's degree with a specialty in Tolkien studies and studying fantasy and science fiction literature. A lot of people just really haven't had the opportunity to really dig into that kind of literature and film, and we love to give people a chance to do that. So mythgard.org is the best single place to do this. I'm
fibbing a little bit here. I shared, maybe we can talk about this another time on email. I put a little bit of a old, I don't know how old it is, folk English Christmas carol that I learned this year. I'd never heard it. It's called "Tomorrow Shall Be My Dancing Day." Have you ever heard it, Professor Olson?
I don't think so.
I don't know if you have a couple seconds to look at that text. The second one is how it starts. Tomorrow shall be my dancing day. I would my true love did so chance to see the legend of my play, to call my true love to my dance. And then, oh, tomorrow, love, love, my love. So it's this weird kind of Song of Solomon-like imagery. And then there's this great thing where it says, for 30 pence Judas me sold, his covetous for to advance. Mark whom I kiss, the same do hold, the same as he shall lead us to the dance. And I wondered whether this carol was written by a hobbit. And I wondered if it just made me think of how a hobbit might write, although it gets a little bit heavy there.
Yeah,
I was a bit concerned you were going to ask us to sing it.
yeah,
Oh, we'll do that next. Like, tomorrow shall be my dancing day. It's just like English, cute little carol. I'm a musician. We didn't get a chance to talk about music, but I think a little bit about what you do, Professor Olson, and I've been thinking about music. I study harpsichord and early music too, medieval Renaissance. But I was fascinated by that carol and how just the folky imagery was a lot of fun to actually take some things that you teach and look at Christmas carols. Might be fun to do someday.
That's the text is Renaissance. Is that 17th century?
Wikipedia says the 1800s, but you never know with these things because they're probably documented by somebody, because I think it's a English folk song.
Yeah.
Tomorrow should be my dancing day. Very quirky imagery that I just thought was fun.
It sounds, I mean, I said 17th century, 16th, because that's what it sounds like to me. It sounds
it does to me too.
It sounds like John Donne's Christmas Carol is what it sounds like.
Right.
And because it's not even imagery. That's like that's like a metaphysical conceit with like the virgin and the fleshly substance and the parallel between the physical and the spiritual that seems to be going on there. Especially then when you went to the second verse that you were.
It's a later verse, but that one's juicy, so I threw that in about like Judas will now lead us in the dance.
Wow. Absolutely, yeah. No, it sounds very. I could totally believe that that's right. It doesn't sound 19th century at all. It doesn't even sound 18th century. But anyway,
we'll have to study that. The Wikipedia is probably not even correct. I wouldn't be surprised. But anyway, I'm sorry that I tacked that on the end. I just had that on my mind. And because I thought of you, everyone who's watching this, make sure you do enjoy confession. I started listening to your podcast just as something to go to sleep. I thought they were going to be boring, and then I could, because I do that, I'll listen to like economic lectures to go to sleep, but they were not boring, and they often keep me up through the night. But it's great because you can go back and listen to them, and as you can tell, Professor Olson really gives himself to his text. And we appreciate him joining us. So thank you all very much. Leanne, you want to close us?
I was just going to say, look, thank you, Professor Olson. This has been amazing. I have been on Blab for as long as you can be on Blab for. And I don't think I've ever seen as many people watching from the web. At the moment, we still have 20 people. So if you look on the top of the screen where there's the plus 20, that's right. People just watching from the web that are actually not logged in to the actual Blab site. So I've never seen that many logged in from the web. So it's fantastic. So that's actually proved that that people have come from the tweets and that sort of thing. So is there an echo? Sorry. And so so that's fantastic. So people that are watching from the web, look, it's really simple to join Blab, and then you can comment, because at the moment you can't comment from the web. So if you, just, join with your Twitter account. If you don't have a Twitter account, just create one and come in, because Blab's an amazing place to meet a whole range and learn about some amazing things. So thanks to everyone that's been here. So I just came along to co-host.
Thank you, Leanne. It was fantastic. It really helped me not be as nervous because I knew you were there to get rid of the naked people and the dancing monkeys, and it wasn't a problem.
We didn't have any, which is fantastic. No. Can I just say, for anyone watching and anyone wanting to watch the replay will sit on the same URL as this as this blab has been, but will also sit on Erin's iRoots.org blab profile, and it'll sit on my blab profile. And Professor, would you like it to sit under yours as well? If I make you a co-host, then the replay will sit under your blab profile as well. So I'll just do that. Then yeah, that replay will sit under. So if you go to blab.im/ each of our handles, that's where the replay will also sit.
Great.
So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a joy.
Excellent. Thank you.